Even now, at 82 years, I can still hear my daughter Emily's cries echoing in my ears. Cries that came from the cruel hand of the woman who was supposed to be family, my own mother-in-law. You know, people always say blood is thicker than water. That family comes first no matter what. Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes the people who share your last name can become your greatest enemies. I was just 24 years old, a young wife trying to make a life in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, where secrets traveled faster than gossip at Sunday service. I thought I knew what marriage meant, what family looked like. I thought I could handle anything as long as I had love and good intentions. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the war that was about to unfold in my own home. You see, when you marry someone, you don't just marry them, you marry their whole family, their history, their demons. And my husband's mother, Agnes Miller, she had demons all right. She ruled that house with an iron fist wrapped in false sweetness, and she made it crystal clear from day one that I would never be good enough for her precious son. But the day she laid her hands on my 3-year-old Emily, the day she made my baby girl cry tears of fear and pain, that was the day everything changed. I was trapped between my loyalty to the man I loved and my duty to protect the child I would die for. That day, I reached my breaking point. And what I did next, it changed the course of my life forever. My name is Beth Miller, I'm 82 years old now, and this is the story of what happened to me. You know, I wasn't always someone who stayed quiet when things went wrong. When I was 8 years old, I had this cousin Jenny who was smaller than the rest of us kids, real timid and sweet. There were these older boys at school who would corner her during recess, take her lunch money, sometimes even push her down just because they could. One day I watched it happen from across the playground, and something inside me just snapped. I marched right over there and told those boys exactly what I thought of them picking on someone half their size. Got myself a black eye for my trouble, but Jenny never got bothered again after that. My mother always said I had too much fire in me for my own good. She'd shake her head and tell me that a lady should know when to hold her tongue, that causing waves would only bring me heartache. And maybe she was right, because that fire got buried somewhere along the way. When I got married and moved into Robert's family home, I learned real quick that keeping peace meant keeping quiet. I trained myself to bite my tongue, to smooth things over, to be the kind of wife and daughter-in-law that wouldn't cause problems. But watching Agnes hurt my Emily, it brought that 8-year-old girl right back to the surface. The one who couldn't stand to see someone smaller and weaker get hurt, while everyone else just looked the other way. I'd like to think some of you watching know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you've been in a spot where you had to choose between fitting in and standing up. Maybe you've felt that same fire I'm talking about. I want to thank God and thank you, my dear friends who are watching me now. Tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of the day did you find this video? Are you having your morning coffee or exercise, or perhaps resting after lunch, or just chilling in your bedroom at night? Or are you like me who likes to watch my little ones before bed? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from, and when you take out time to listen to this grandma's stories. Thank you and God bless you. Now let me continue my story. The Miller house sat on Elm Street like a monument to respectability. White picket fence, rose bushes that Agnes tended with military precision, lace curtains that never had a speck of dust. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Robert worked at the lumber mill, I kept house and raised Emily and Agnes. Well, Agnes ruled over all of us like a queen in her castle. Agnes Miller was 63 when I married into that family, a woman who had raised 5 sons and buried a husband. She had steel gray hair pulled back so tight it stretched her face, and eyes that could freeze you with a single look. She'd been running that household for 40 years, and she wasn't about to let some young wife from the wrong side of town come in and change her ways. Every morning she'd inspect my work, checking if I'd dusted the baseboards properly, running her finger along the windowsills, counting the preserves in the pantry like I might be stealing from her stores. But it was my Emily who brought light into that dark house. 3 years old, with golden curls that caught the sunlight and a laugh that could make even the sternest grocer smile. She was the kind of child who talked to ladybugs and saved earthworms from the sidewalk after rain. Emily would follow me around the kitchen, standing on her little wooden stool, trying to help with the cooking while humming songs she made up herself. She had this way of seeing wonder in everything. The way flour looked like snow when it dusted the counter, how the mixing bowl sounded like a bell when she tapped it with a spoon. Agnes tolerated Emily, I suppose, but there was no warmth there. No grandmother's cookies or bedtime stories. She treated my daughter like she was a guest who had overstayed her welcome, always shushing her when she played too loudly, always finding fault with her table manners or the way she wore her dress. Emily learned quickly to tiptoe around her grandmother, to speak in whispers, to make herself as small and invisible as possible. Robert, my husband, he was caught between us like a man standing on a fault line. He loved his mother. I could see it in the way he still asked her opinion about everything, the way he brought her coffee every morning just the way she liked it. But he loved Emily too, in his own quiet way. The problem was, Robert had spent 30 years learning not to cross his mother, and old habits run deep as tree roots. Whenever tension filled the house, he'd just disappear. Suddenly remember he had errands to run or work to catch up on at the mill. Agnes had rules for everything. Emily's toys could only be in her room or the back porch, never the living room. Meals were eaten in complete silence unless Agnes started a conversation. Baths had to be finished by 7 o'clock sharp, and Emily's bedtime stories couldn't last more than 10 minutes because too much excitement before sleep was bad for children's constitution. I followed these rules because I thought I was keeping peace, thought I was being a good wife by respecting my husband's mother. But Agnes kept pushing. She'd criticized the way I dressed Emily, said the child was getting spoiled with too much attention. She'd make Emily stand in the corner for laughing too loud during her afternoon play. She started serving Emily smaller portions at dinner, claiming the child was getting pudgy and needed discipline. I bit my tongue through all of it, telling myself this was just how some families worked, that Agnes came from a different generation with stricter ways. Then came that Tuesday in October. I'd been hanging laundry in the backyard, enjoying the crisp fall air and watching the leaves turn gold on the maple tree. Emily was inside, playing quietly in the kitchen while Agnes prepared lunch. I heard the crash first, the sound of something breaking against the floor. Then I heard Agnes's voice, sharp and cold, saying, "Look what you've done now, you clumsy little thing." I dropped the wet sheet I was holding and rushed toward the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see Emily standing next to the table, water puddle at her feet, and the pieces of Agnes's good water glass scattered around her small shoes. My daughter's face was already crumpling, those big blue eyes filling with tears because she knew what was coming. Agnes stood over her like a storm cloud, her hand already raised. "This is what happens when children don't pay attention," she said, and her voice carried the kind of coldness that makes your bones ache. "Maybe this will teach you to be more careful." The slap came down hard across Emily's cheek, hard enough that my baby stumbled backward and hit the kitchen cabinet. Hard enough that the sound echoed through that house like a gunshot. Emily's cry wasn't just hurt. It was pure terror, the kind of sound that cuts through a mother's heart like broken glass. And Robert was right there at the kitchen table, reading his newspaper like nothing was happening at all. He turned a page while his daughter sobbed, and his mother stood there looking satisfied with her lesson. That's when I walked through the kitchen door, and Agnes turned to look at me with those cold eyes of hers, expecting me to apologize for Emily's clumsiness, expecting me to thank her for correcting my child's behavior. And in that moment my blood turned to fire. I knew I couldn't let this continue. Standing there in that kitchen, watching my daughter's tear-stained face, I was suddenly 10 years old again, back in my childhood home after my father remarried. My stepmother Helen was nothing like Agnes. She wasn't cruel, exactly, just distant. Cold in a different way. She had her own 2 children from her first marriage, and it was clear from the start that I was the extra one, the reminder of the wife who came before her. I remember this one afternoon when I was playing with my stepbrother's toy soldiers in the living room. I'd been so careful with them, lining them up in perfect rows on the carpet, making up stories about their adventures. Helen walked in just as I was reaching for the last soldier, and somehow my elbow knocked over her favorite lamp. It wasn't even broken, just fell onto the sofa cushions, but you would have thought I'd burned the house down from the way she reacted. She made me stand in the corner for 3 hours. 3 whole hours with my nose pressed against the wallpaper, watching the sun move across the floor through the window, listening to my stepbrothers play outside while I stayed frozen in place. My father was at work, and when he came home, Helen told him I'd been destructive and disrespectful. He just nodded and told me to apologize, never once asking for my side of the story. What I remember most wasn't the punishment itself, it was the feeling of being completely alone in a house full of people. The way Helen looked at me afterward, like I was something that needed to be managed rather than loved. The way my father trusted her word over mine without question. I felt invisible and powerless, like my voice didn't matter, like nothing I said could change how they saw me. But the worst part was watching my stepbrothers learn that it was okay to treat me differently. They saw how Helen spoke to me, how she assigned me extra chores while they played, how she served them larger portions at dinner. Children learn what they live, and they learned that some people in a family matter more than others. Looking at Emily in that kitchen, seeing her press herself against the cabinet with her hand touching her red cheek, I saw myself at 10 years old again. That same confusion, that same fear, that same terrible understanding that the adults who were supposed to protect you might be the ones who hurt you instead. Emily's eyes held that exact look I remembered from my own reflection all those years ago. The look of a child who's learning that home isn't always safe, that love isn't always kind. I'd sworn when Emily was born that she would never feel what I felt in my stepmother's house. I'd promised myself she would grow up knowing she was wanted, knowing her voice mattered, knowing that someone would always fight for her. But there I was, letting history repeat itself, watching my own daughter learn to make herself small and quiet, and invisible just like I had learned to do. After that day in the kitchen, something shifted in Agnes. It was like she'd tasted blood and wanted more. The slap wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She started finding fault with everything Emily did, and I mean everything. If Emily walked too fast down the hallway, Agnes would scold her for being reckless. If she walked too slow, she was dawdling and wasting time. Emily couldn't win no matter what she did. Agnes began timing Emily's meals, standing over her with that old brass clock from the mantel, counting down the minutes. "Children who don't finish their food in 15 minutes don't deserve dessert," she'd announce, even though Emily was only 3 and still learning to use her fork properly. I'd watch my daughter's little hands shake as she tried to eat faster, sometimes choking on her food because she was so afraid of running out of time. The punishments got worse too. Agnes made Emily stand in the corner for what felt like hours over the smallest things, dropping a crayon, humming while she played, asking for water between meals. But it wasn't just the standing. Agnes would make her hold her arms out to her sides while she stood there, and if Emily's arms dropped even a little, the timer would start over again. I'd find excuses to walk past that corner, seeing my daughter's little face scrunched up in concentration and pain, tears rolling down her cheeks as she tried so hard to be good enough. I tried talking to Robert about it, of course. The first time, I waited until we were getting ready for bed, when the house was quiet and Agnes couldn't hear us. "Robert," I said, "your mother is being too hard on Emily. She's just a baby, and these punishments are too much for someone her age." He was brushing his teeth, and he stopped mid-motion, looking at me in the mirror above our dresser. "Beth, my mother raised 5 boys and never had a single problem with any of us. She knows what she's doing. But Emily isn't one of your brothers. She's a little girl, and she's scared all the time now. Look at her. She flinches when Agnes walks into a room." Robert set down his toothbrush and turned to face me, and I could see that familiar look in his eyes, the one that meant he was already building walls between us. "She's my mother, Beth. You know I can't go against her. She's been through enough in her life without having to defend herself in her own home." That conversation happened a dozen more times over the next few months, always with the same result. Robert would listen to my concerns, nod like he understood, then do absolutely nothing to change the situation. It was like talking to a stone wall. Worse than that, actually, because at least a wall doesn't pretend to care about what you're saying. Agnes must have sensed my growing frustration because she started including me in her campaign of control. It began with small criticisms. The way I folded Robert's shirts wasn't quite right. The coffee I made was too weak. I was letting Emily get away with behavior that needed correction. Then it escalated to public humiliation. She'd correct my parenting in front of neighbors, telling Mrs. Henderson from next door that I was too lenient with Emily, that the child needed a firmer hand. One evening in November, I was helping Emily with her bath when Agnes burst into the bathroom without knocking. "What are you doing?" she demanded, looking at the bubbles in the tub like I'd filled it with poison. "Just giving Emily her bath," I said, confused by her tone. "Bubble baths make children soft," Agnes announced. "And the water's too warm. You're going to make her sick." She pushed past me, actually pushed me, and started draining the tub while Emily was still sitting in it. My daughter looked up at me with those wide, frightened eyes, and I felt something crack inside my chest. "Agnes, please don't. Don't tell me how to care for children in my own house," she snapped, and there was real venom in her voice now. "I've been raising babies since before you were born, and I won't have some girl who doesn't know better undermining my authority." Emily started crying then, not just from the cold water, but from the tension crackling between us adults. Agnes yanked her out of the tub so roughly that Emily slipped and scraped her knee on the edge. While my daughter wailed, Agnes wrapped her in a towel and carried her out of the bathroom, leaving me standing there dripping wet and shaking with anger. That night, after Robert fell asleep, I lay in bed listening to Emily whimper in her room across the hall. She'd been having nightmares for weeks, waking up crying for me, but too afraid to leave her bed in case Agnes heard her moving around. I'd sneak into her room and hold her until she fell back asleep, whispering promises that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself anymore. Emily started getting sick more often. Stomach aches that the doctor couldn't explain, headaches that made her curl up in dark corners, a persistent cough that wouldn't go away no matter how much medicine I gave her. She stopped singing her made-up songs. She stopped asking questions about everything she saw. The light in her eyes grew dimmer every day, and I knew it was fear doing that to her. Fear was eating my daughter alive from the inside out. I began making plans in my head during those long, sleepless nights. I'd think about packing our things and leaving, but where would we go? I had no money of my own, no family nearby who could help us. My father had remarried and moved 3 states away. My mother was dead. Robert controlled our bank account, and in 1963, wives didn't have many options when it came to supporting themselves and their children. But I started preparing anyway, in small ways that Agnes wouldn't notice. I began saving nickels and dimes from my grocery money, hiding them in an old coffee tin behind the flour canisters. I wrote letters to my aunt in Chicago, the one who'd always been kind to me, asking about jobs and places to live without explaining why I needed to know. I even went to the library and read about women's shelters, though there weren't many back then, and none within 100 miles of our town. The worst part was watching Emily change. She stopped running to hug Robert when he came home from work. She'd sit at the dinner table eating her small portions in complete silence, glancing nervously at Agnes between every bite. When other children came to play, Emily would ask my permission for everything. Could she share her toys? Could she laugh at their jokes? Could she go outside to play tag? A 3-year-old shouldn't have to ask permission to laugh. Agnes seemed to feed off Emily's fear. The more withdrawn my daughter became, the more Agnes found to criticize. Emily's hair wasn't combed neatly enough. Emily was breathing too loudly during meals. Emily needed to learn that children should be seen and not heard. The punishments got longer, the rules got stricter, and my daughter got smaller and quieter and more afraid every single day. I tried different approaches with Robert. I suggested maybe Emily and I could spend more time at the neighbor's house, or that perhaps Agnes might enjoy having some time to herself without a small child underfoot. I even offered to find us our own place, knowing we couldn't afford it, but hoping he might surprise me. Every conversation ended the same way, with Robert defending his mother and me feeling more alone than ever. Then came the day Agnes went too far with me. Emily had accidentally tracked mud into the kitchen after playing outside, and I was down on my hands and knees cleaning it up when Agnes walked in. She looked at the floor, then at Emily, then at me, and her face twisted with disgust. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice loud enough that Emily could hear every word. "You let that child run wild, and then you clean up after her like a servant. No wonder she has no discipline. Look at the example you're setting." I kept scrubbing the floor, trying to stay calm. "She's just playing, Agnes. All children get dirty when they play. All children need mothers who know how to raise them properly," Agnes shot back. "My sons never would have dared track mud through my kitchen because they knew there would be consequences. But you just enable her bad behavior. That's when she did it." Agnes grabbed my shoulder and pulled me up from the floor so hard that I stumbled backward into the counter. Emily was watching from the doorway, her little mouth open in shock. Maybe if you spent less time coddling her and more time teaching her respect, she'd learn to behave like a proper child instead of a wild animal. I looked at my daughter's face and saw pure terror there. Emily wasn't afraid of getting in trouble. She was afraid for me. A 3-year-old child was worried about protecting her mother, and that realization hit me like a physical blow. After that day, I started making real plans. I contacted my aunt in Chicago and told her everything, asking if Emily and I could stay with her until I found work. I researched bus schedules and calculated how much money I'd need for tickets. I even found a small suitcase in the attic and hid it under our bed, slowly filling it with Emily's clothes and our important papers. But Agnes wasn't finished with us yet. The night I finally rose against her, the night everything changed forever, it started with Emily spilling milk at dinner. Just a little splash on the tablecloth, the kind of accident that happens when small hands try to manage big glasses. Agnes exploded like she'd been waiting for this moment all day. My hands shook as I watched what happened next, but I knew there was no turning back. Agnes didn't just slap Emily this time. She backhanded her across the face with enough force that my 3-year-old daughter went down like she'd been hit by a grown man. Emily's head struck the edge of her chair as she fell, and she crumpled to the kitchen floor in a heap of blue dress and golden curls. The sound of her skull hitting that wooden chair will live in my nightmares until the day I die. For a moment, Emily didn't make any sound at all. She just lay there on the linoleum, perfectly still, and my heart stopped beating in my chest. Then she started crying, not the regular tears of a hurt child, but these deep, gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere broken inside her. She couldn't even lift her head up off the floor. I looked at Robert, sitting there at his place at the dinner table with his fork halfway to his mouth. He was staring at Emily on the floor, and I could see something flicker across his face, shock, maybe even horror. But he didn't move. He didn't put down his fork, didn't rush to help his daughter, didn't say a single word to his mother. He just sat there like a statue while his 3-year-old child lay crumpled on the kitchen floor. Agnes was standing over Emily, and you know what she said? She said, "Well, maybe now you'll remember to be more careful with your milk." Like my daughter was a dog who'd just been house-trained. Like the violence was a lesson instead of an assault. Something exploded inside me then. Not anger. Anger is too small a word for what I felt. It was like every moment of silence I'd swallowed, every cruel word I'd ignored, every time I'd chosen peace over protection came rushing out of me all at once. I dropped to my knees beside Emily, gathering her into my arms while she sobbed against my shoulder. Her whole body was shaking, and there was already a red mark spreading across her cheek where Agnes's hand had connected. I stood up with Emily in my arms, and I looked Agnes Miller straight in the eye. "Touch my daughter again," I said, and my voice was steady even though my hands were trembling, "and you'll never see us in this house again." Agnes actually laughed. She threw back her head and laughed like I just told her the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Oh, really? And where exactly do you think you'll go, little girl? You have no money, no job, no family who'd take you in. You need this house more than this house needs you." But I was already walking toward the stairs with Emily still in my arms. "We'll see about that," I called back over my shoulder. Robert finally found his voice then. "Beth, come back here. Don't be dramatic about this. Mother was just trying to teach Emily some manners." I stopped on the bottom step and turned around. "Dramatic? Your mother just knocked our daughter to the floor, and you think I'm being dramatic?" "She was correcting her behavior," Robert said, but he couldn't quite meet my eyes when he said it. "Children need discipline. Children need protection," I shot back. "And if you can't see the difference, then you're not the man I thought I married." I carried Emily upstairs to our room and locked the door. She was still crying, but quieter now, these little hiccuping sobs that broke my heart into smaller and smaller pieces. I sat on our bed with her in my lap, rocking her gently and checking her head where it had hit the chair. There was a small bump forming, but no blood, thank God. "Mommy," Emily whispered against my neck, "I didn't mean to spill the milk." "I know, sweetheart. It was an accident. Accidents happen, and nobody should hurt you for accidents." "Is Grandma Agnes mad at me?" I held her tighter. "Grandma Agnes is wrong to hurt you, Emily. It's never okay for grown-ups to hurt little children, even when they're upset. Do you understand that?" Emily nodded against my shoulder, and I made a decision right then and there. I wasn't going to wait for the perfect plan or the perfect moment. I wasn't going to hope things would get better on their own. I was going to get my daughter out of that house, even if it meant leaving with nothing but the clothes on our backs. I waited until Emily fell asleep. Then I pulled that hidden suitcase out from under the bed and started packing. I took only what we absolutely needed. A few changes of clothes for both of us, Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit, some money from my coffee tin, and the important papers from Robert's desk drawer. Birth certificates, marriage license, Emily's medical records. I knew I might need them later. The house was quiet when I crept downstairs with Emily sleeping in my arms and our suitcase in my free hand. Agnes had gone to bed, and Robert was in his study, probably avoiding the whole situation like he always did when things got uncomfortable. I didn't leave a note. I didn't try to explain myself one more time. I just walked out that front door into the November night air. Mrs. Parker lived 3 blocks away in a little yellow house with a garden full of chrysanthemums. She'd been widowed for 10 years and had always been kind to Emily and me, letting us pick flowers for our kitchen table and sometimes sharing cookies over the fence. When I knocked on her door at 9 o'clock that night with Emily in my arms and tears on my face, she didn't ask a single question. She just opened her door wider and said, "Come in, dear. Both of you." Mrs. Parker made up her guest room with fresh sheets while I put Emily down on the living room sofa. My daughter woke up just enough to ask where we were, and when I told her we were having a sleepover at Mrs. Parker's house, she just nodded and went back to sleep. Children are more resilient than we think, but they're also more fragile than we remember. I stayed up all night in that guest room, listening to Emily breathe beside me and planning what came next. Mrs. Parker had offered to let us stay as long as we needed, but I knew that wasn't a real solution. Agnes would find ways to make life difficult for anyone who helped us, and Mrs. Parker didn't deserve that kind of trouble. Robert showed up the next morning before breakfast, pounding on Mrs. Parker's front door like he was trying to wake the whole neighborhood. I answered it myself, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me so Emily wouldn't have to see or hear whatever was about to happen. "Beth, this is ridiculous," he started, but his voice was softer than I'd expected. "Come home. We can work this out." "Can we?" "Because yesterday you sat there and watched your mother hurt our daughter, and you did nothing to stop it. She was disciplining her. She knocked a 3-year-old child to the floor, Robert. If a stranger did that to Emily, you'd call the police. But because it's your mother, you call it discipline." Robert looked older than his 26 years standing there on Mrs. Parker's porch. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was uncombed like he'd been running his hands through it all night. "What do you want me to do, Beth? She's my mother. I can't just throw her out." "I'm not asking you to throw her out. I'm asking you to protect your child. I'm asking you to set boundaries. I'm asking you to be a father instead of just a son." We talked for almost an hour on that porch, going in circles like we always did. Robert would promise to talk to his mother, to make things better, to find some middle ground that would work for everyone. But when I asked him directly if he was willing to tell Agnes she couldn't hit Emily anymore, he couldn't give me a straight answer. "She's been through a lot," he kept saying. "Losing my father was hard on her. She's just set in her ways. And Emily is 3 years old, Robert. She shouldn't have to pay the price for your mother's grief." That's when Robert finally got honest with me. "I can't choose between you and my mother, Beth. I won't do it. You're asking me to tear my family apart." "Your family is already torn apart," I told him. "You just haven't been willing to see it." He left after that, promising to come back when I was being more reasonable. But I was done being reasonable. Reasonable had gotten my daughter hurt. Reasonable had taught Emily that her own home wasn't safe. Reasonable was just another word for weak, and I couldn't afford to be weak anymore. I enrolled Emily in the little nursery school across town, using Mrs. Parker's address. I found work at the diner on Main Street, washing dishes and waiting tables for tips and a small wage. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mrs. Parker watched Emily in the evenings when I worked the dinner shift, and slowly, over the course of a few weeks, I started seeing my real daughter again. Emily began laughing at Mrs. Parker's silly jokes. She started asking for second helpings at dinner without looking around nervously first. She slept through the night without nightmares. The change in her was like watching a flower bloom after a long, hard winter. Robert came by several more times over the next month, always with the same request. "Come home, we'll work it out, things will be different." But when I asked him what exactly would be different, he never had an answer. Agnes was still living in that house. Agnes still believed she was right. And Robert still wouldn't stand up to her. The last time Robert came to Mrs. Parker's house, it was December, and snow was starting to fall. Emily was playing in the living room, building a castle out of blocks that Mrs. Parker had bought for her. She looked up when Robert walked in, but she didn't run to him like she used to. She just said, "Hi, Daddy," in a small, careful voice and went back to her blocks. "Beth," Robert said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice now. "Please. I miss you both. I miss my family." "Then choose your family," I told him. "Choose Emily. Choose the life we could have together. But I won't bring my daughter back into a house where she gets hurt for spilling milk." Robert stood there for a long moment, watching Emily play with her blocks. She was humming again, one of her made-up songs, and the sound filled Mrs. Parker's warm living room like sunshine. Then he looked at me, and I saw something break in his eyes. "I can't," he said quietly. "I can't ask my mother to leave. She has nowhere else to go." "Then neither do we," I replied. He left that day and didn't come back. I heard through town gossip that he moved Agnes to a smaller place closer to his work, that he sold the house on Elm Street and started over somewhere new. Part of me wondered if he'd finally found the courage to choose his own family, but he never reached out to us again. Maybe he was too proud. Maybe he was too ashamed. Maybe Agnes convinced him we were better off without him. That day taught me that silence is dangerous. When you see cruelty and say nothing, when you watch someone hurt the people you love and call it keeping peace, you become part of the problem. No family bond, no marriage vow, no tradition or expectation should excuse hurting a child. And no adult, whether they're a mother-in-law, a husband, or anyone else, has the right to demand your silence when a child is being harmed. I learned that sometimes protecting the people you love means losing the people you thought you loved. Sometimes being a good mother means being called a bad wife. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything you thought you wanted, but gives you back something you didn't even know you'd lost, your self-respect. Emily is 61 years old now, and she has 3 grown children of her own. She became a teacher, spent 35 years helping other people's children learn and grow and feel safe in her classroom. She married a man who treats her with kindness, who's never raised his voice to her in 38 years of marriage. When I watch her with her own children, the way she listened to their problems without judgment, the way she encouraged their dreams, I know I made the right choice all those years ago. She doesn't remember much about those early years with Agnes, thank goodness. What she remembers is Mrs. Parker's kindness, the little yellow house with the flower garden, the diner where I worked, and how the other waitresses would sneak her extra pieces of pie. She remembers feeling loved and safe, and that's what matters. People ask me sometimes if I ever regretted leaving Robert. The honest answer is yes. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep missing the man I thought I'd married. There were times when money was so tight I didn't know how we'd make rent. But then I'd look at Emily and see how she was blooming away from that house of fear, and I knew I'd done the right thing. I want you to know that leaving wasn't easy. There were years of struggle, years when I worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. But we built something good together, Emily and I. We built a life where children's laughter was welcomed, where mistakes were forgiven, where love was patient and kind. I think about young mothers today who might be watching this and recognizing something familiar in my story. Maybe you're living with family members who don't respect your parenting. Maybe you're married to someone who won't stand up for you. Maybe you're watching your own children learn to be afraid in their own home. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was 24. Your children are watching everything. They're learning from every moment when you choose to speak up or stay silent. When you protect them, you're teaching them they're worth protecting. When you stand up for them, you're teaching them to stand up for themselves. Emily learned to be strong because I finally chose strength over silence. She learned to value herself because I showed her she was valuable enough to fight for. Those are lessons worth any sacrifice. If my story has touched something in your heart, I hope you'll share it with others who might need to hear it. I'd love to hear your own stories in the comments below. Tell me about a time when you had to choose between keeping peace and protecting someone you loved. Thank you for listening to an old woman's memories. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Grandparents Archives channel. Also tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means a lot to me.